My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 73 years old, and I'm here to tell you something most people only understand when it's already too late. I stayed married for 41 years and only realized what we lost when there was no time left to recover it. The deepest regrets in life don't come from dramatic mistakes. They don't arrive with scandals, betrayals, or sudden disasters. They come from ordinary days, from moments that felt too small to matter when they were happening. They arrive quietly, slowly, one decision at a time. At the time, none of those decisions felt dangerous. I would only understand their weight years later when reversing them was no longer possible. And by the time you finally recognize them, they've already shaped the life you're standing in. I never planned to speak about this publicly. For a long time, I believed some truths were meant to be carried privately. But there are lessons that feel almost cruel to keep once you understand what they cost. This isn't a story about cruelty or failure. It's about what happens when love is assumed instead of nurtured, when time feels endless, when comfort slowly replaces connection without anyone noticing. If you believe you still have time, I need you to listen carefully. What I learned came too late for me. It may not be too late for you. I was married for 41 years. When people hear that number, they usually smile. They assume it means loyalty, commitment, a love that survived everything life could throw at it. For a long time, I believed that too. From the outside, our marriage looked solid. We built a home together, we raised a family, we showed up for birthdays, holidays, funerals, and weddings. We stayed. And staying is often treated as proof that something is working. Those early years weren't perfect. We disagreed, we struggled, but we stayed engaged. We made time without scheduling it. Closeness didn't feel like work. It was simply how we existed together, trusting that attention itself was the foundation of our bond. The shift didn't announce itself with an argument or a breaking point. There was no moment I could point to and say, this is when everything changed. It happened quietly, disguised as responsibility and routine, which made it easy to excuse. Work demanded more of his attention, and I told myself that was understandable. Evenings grew shorter. Conversations that once wandered freely began circling the same practical concerns. Schedules, finances, repairs, plans for the next day. There was always something that needed managing, something that felt more urgent than sitting together without purpose. I convinced myself this was adulthood, that love matured into efficiency, that intimacy softened naturally under the weight of responsibility. I didn't want to seem unreasonable or needy, so I adjusted my expectations instead. But slowly, something essential slipped away. We stopped lingering in conversation. We stopped asking questions that didn't have clear answers. Silence became familiar, comfortable. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt postponed. I told myself that postponement was temporary. I didn't know it would quietly become permanent, as if closeness was something we'd return to once life finally slowed down. It never did. For a long time, I tried to pull us back toward each other in small, careful ways. I didn't demand change. I didn't accuse. I simply invited him into moments that mattered to me. I suggested taking a class together, something creative, something new. I asked if we could go dancing again the way we once had. I mentioned trips, short ones at first, just a few days away from routine. Each suggestion was gentle, casual, easy to decline, and most of the time they were declined. There was always a reason. Work was busy, money needed attention, rest felt necessary. I understood every explanation, which made it harder to argue against them. I wasn't asking for extravagance. I was asking for shared presence, for proof that connection still mattered and hadn't quietly slipped away. Over time, something in me began to change, not suddenly, but gradually, the way skin toughens after repeated friction. I learned which requests would be declined before I voiced them. I learned how to soften my expectations so disappointment wouldn't cut as deeply. I stopped asking as often, then I stopped asking at all. It wasn't punishment, it was preservation. Each refusal, however reasonable, carried a quiet message. That connection was optional, that it could wait, that it mattered less than whatever else filled his day. So I adjusted. I filled my time with other things, friends, hobbies, solitude that felt safer than hope. I told myself this was maturity, that needing less was strength. But what I was really doing was shrinking my needs to fit the space that remained. I was adapting to absence while pretending it didn't hurt. The loneliest part of my marriage wasn't being alone. It was being together without truly meeting each other anymore. We shared a house, shared meals, shared a history that stretched back decades. From the outside, nothing looked wrong, but inside that sameness, something vital was missing. We spoke politely, coordinated logistics, knew each other's habits well enough to avoid conflict, but we no longer reached for each other emotionally. Conversation stayed safe, surface level, contained. I learned how to sit beside someone while feeling unseen, how to sleep next to someone and still feel separate. There is a particular ache that comes from that kind of loneliness, one that doesn't announce itself, one that's hard to explain to anyone else. It felt safer to expect nothing than to keep hoping for closeness that never came. That way of living felt sustainable until something happened that made avoidance impossible. Everything changed the day I was diagnosed. Illness strips life down to what is real. Suddenly, time was no longer theoretical. It was measured in appointments, test results, and the quiet spaces between conversations. Plans we had postponed for years vanished overnight. There was no later to rely on anymore, no someday to soften the fear. Every moment carried weight because there were fewer of them left. We were forced to look at each other without distraction, without routine to hide behind. In some ways, it brought us closer. In others, it revealed how far apart we had already drifted. I became painfully aware of everything we had delayed, every conversation left unfinished, every experience we assumed would wait. Illness didn't create our distance. It exposed it. Suddenly, without mercy. In the final weeks, we talked in ways we hadn't for years. Not politely, not carefully, honestly. There was no time left for avoidance. Pretending felt pointless. I told him about the loneliness I had carried quietly, about the moments I felt invisible while standing right beside him, about the parts of myself I had folded away to keep peace, to keep things easy. He listened in a way I hadn't seen before, without interruption, without defense. And for the first time in a long while, I felt fully heard. There was tenderness in those conversations, but also grief. Grief for what we were finally naming when it was almost over. We weren't angry. We were mourning time we could never recover. Honesty arrived too late to change our past, but not too late to understand it, to finally name the cost of our long silence. One evening, close to the end, I told him about a dream I'd carried most of my life. I wanted to visit Scotland. My grandmother was born there. I had always imagined walking through the Highlands, seeing where her story began, feeling connected to something older than myself. I'd mentioned it over the years, casually at first, then less often. Each time it was postponed, too expensive, not the right season, maybe later, when things were calmer. Now there was no later. I wasn't angry when I spoke about it. I was tired, resigned, like someone acknowledging a door that had quietly closed long ago. He asked why I never insisted. I told him the truth. I didn't want obligation. I wanted shared desire. I wanted him to care because it mattered to me, and because sharing it together would have changed us. What I understand now, far too late, is that the greatest danger to a relationship isn't conflict. It isn't betrayal or cruelty or some dramatic act. It's indifference. The slow, quiet belief that effort is no longer required. Indifference shows up as postponement, as assuming there will always be more time, as believing history can replace attention. It convinces you that love is stable enough to survive neglect. But love doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes, it thins, it grows quieter until one day you realize it's been replaced by routine and familiarity. We didn't stop loving each other. We stopped choosing each other. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. If you are sharing your life with someone right now, I hope you pause and truly consider them. Not the role they play in your routine, but the person they are becoming beside you. Ask yourself when you last listened without distraction, without multitasking, without waiting for your turn to speak. When you last asked a question without already knowing the answer or steering the conversation somewhere safe. When you last chose closeness over convenience, presence over productivity, attention over habit. These things don't feel urgent while life is busy and responsibilities demand constant attention. But they are the quiet threads that hold a relationship together over years and decades. Do not assume your partner will always be there in the same way, emotionally or physically. Do not rely on time to repair what attention, care, and curiosity could preserve right now. The smallest efforts, repeated consistently, matter far more than grand gestures ever will. I believe there would always be another chance, another season, another moment to return. I was wrong. I understand that now, and I live with that truth every single day. I live with the understanding now that love isn't measured by how long you stay, but by how present you are while you're there, day after day. Years together mean very little if curiosity, attention, and care quietly disappear along the way. I don't blame him, and I no longer blame myself for what we failed to protect. We did what many people do. We assumed time would always give us another opportunity. It won't. Time does not pause, negotiate, or wait for us to feel ready. Time doesn't announce when it's running out. It simply does, quietly and without negotiation. If there is one truth I hope you carry with you, it's this. Closeness is not automatic. It must be chosen, protected, and renewed again and again. Because once time decides otherwise, regret becomes the only remaining companion.